So the message here is clear. Use the wheel as a guide, not as a rule book.
And whether a top-down or a bottom-up approach is used, the method for translating strategy into execution actually remains the same, because the architecture roadmap uses these stages to provide a clear and predictable view of the impact of the defined initiatives of the organization.
I think visibility is everything. We need a clear line of sight between the roadmap, execution, and the impact behind the initiatives as well. How do EA roadmaps differ from traditional project or digital transformation roadmaps? One of the most important benefits of the EA, which is having multiple viewpoints depending on the target audience.
AI focuses on automated execution, while the EA wheel offers an approach to steer it in the right direction. So we've shown you the enterprise architecture implementation wheel, right? The EA wheel, or implementation wheel in short, which is a practical and pragmatic approach to developing a fundamental enterprise architecture. Now, it is based on the TOGAF standard, but it kind of differs from the TOGAF standard in that it adapts TOGAF's structure and flow by reorganizing its content into 4 main stages, which are document, define, execute, and control. And each stage is broken down into 1 or more steps, each of which includes key focus areas and actionable artifacts. So the straightforward description of the steps within a method actually ensures an actionable and accessible approach. And the simplicity with which the actions and outcomes are described and explained makes the method applicable to, I think, almost any situation or scenario. Now, rather than aiming for exhaustive coverage, the EA wheel approach provides a scalable foundation that organizations can actually build upon as they mature. So it establishes this solid basis for effectively adopting and applying the core principles of the TOGAF standard. Designed for, I think, early career architects or organizations that are new to architecture, the enterprise architecture implementation wheel approach emphasizes clarity and usability. And it includes a selection of tailored catalogs, diagrams, maps, matrices, which are essential deliverables that make fundamental architecture easier to understand and to implement. And the EA wheel approach can be thought of as this simplified, tailored version of the TOGAF standard, providing an approach that is easy to understand and apply to creating a fundamental enterprise architecture.
Welcome back to the EA Explained from the Analyst Architect. In our last episode, we walked through the EA implementation wheel, Eric's practical model for building and sustaining enterprise architecture as a continuous cycle. He introduced it in his book, Getting Started with Enterprise Architecture. And today, in the second part of the same discussion, we are taking that conversation one step further. We will explore what happens after the architecture is defined, how actually execute, control, and track EA. And later in the episode, we will look at how the EA implementation wheel can evolve, how architects can tailor it to their needs, and even extend it using AI. Eric, good to have you back. Ready to jump into the second part of the EA implementation wheel journey?
Absolutely, Omar. It's always a pleasure to join you for these sessions. And like I said last time, I'm convinced that we will be delivering another interesting session. So let's dive into it.
Once the architecture is defined and the organization starts acting on it, the big question always comes: how do we execute the work without losing visibility or control?
Yeah, so I think this is where the third stage of the EA wheel approach comes into play. And this stage is called execute, and it's all about getting the organizational strategy implemented. So the execute stage consists of 2 steps. The first step explains how to achieve an execution of the strategy which was defined in the previous stage. So this takes into account the previously established goals and objectives. The second step of this stage deals with the creation of a roadmap, an architecture roadmap, which is based on the objectives to be achieved and, of course, the related initiatives and activities. So step 1, strategy, is about creating this overview that shows the translation of strategy to its execution. And once the drivers, the goals, the objectives and initiatives have been established, determined, or even distilled from the existing documents that describe the organization's direction, then it's up to the enterprise architect to translate the strategy into a feasible implementation, or at least help the organization to do so. Now, a top-down approach, I think, would be ideal to use. And this is why the TOGAF states that business goals must be defined in its preliminary phase. However, in practice, this often works differently because an organization already exists. So it usually already has a description of its strategic direction. Now, with existing organizations, there is no greenfield situation. So they exist, they run, they grow, the organization functions, right? So it has to make do with what it has. And as a result, bottom-up approach, I think, must be used. So basically, this means using this strategic agenda, if you will, that already exists, combined with the goals and the objectives that have been set. And through reverse engineering, it is possible to look at what is already being done in the company and relate it to the existing strategic direction. So subsequently, in this way, there is kind of retrospective accountability. And whether a top-down or a bottom-up approach is used, the method for translating strategy into execution actually remains the same, because both approaches require an inventory of the organization across all architecture domains. And this is outlined in step 1, information of the first stage of the enterprise architecture implementation wheel approach, as we discussed in the previous episode. So after having defined these goals and objectives and the initiatives which are necessary to realize the execution of the organizational strategy, we want to be able to use a roadmap, an architecture roadmap, like I said before, to plan these initiatives. And this allows us to keep track of them and to measure their progress. Now, a roadmap is basically a timeline of a defined initiative or multiple initiatives in form of work packages. So in order to complete stage 3, execute, of the EA wheel, specifically the creation of this roadmap, 2 things need to be accomplished. First, an overview of the planned initiatives that will flesh out this roadmap is needed. And secondly, it's recommended that these initiatives to be related, of course, to the business goals and objectives. Now, a roadmap shows which work packages are related to which goals or intended objectives. And owners and progress states can be assigned to these work packages. And thus, a roadmap can be used to monitor the progress of the implementation of the organizational strategy. So this is where stages 1, 2, and 3 of the EA wheel approach actually come together, because the architecture roadmap uses these stages to provide a clear and predictable view of the impact of the defined initiatives of the organization. They provide the information that is needed to make sense of the organizational changes, and the deliverables are the end product of these individual work packages. So representing them in the roadmap clarifies when the architecture deliverables will be created and delivered.
I can't agree more. I think visibility is everything. We need a clear line of sight between the roadmap, execution, and the impact behind the initiatives as well. And speaking of visibility, I need to focus on how does the implementation wheel provide a way to measure progress as the architecture develop?
Yeah, well, of course it does. And this is where stage 4, control, actually comes in, as it is concerned with measuring the progress of the implementation of this basic or fundamental enterprise architecture. So it explains how to visualize the progress of the realization of your organizational goals and objectives. So it is that during this stage, the initiatives and the activities to be carried out are monitored and made measurable. And to this end, stage 4 discusses a number of measurement tools and techniques that can be used to actually visualize progress. So it is important to determine what steps are required to achieve the creation of the desired architecture deliverables and the achievement of the goals, so that a percentage of progress can be assigned. So a short step-by-step plan, if you will, can be used to achieve this desired understanding of progress. And therefore, this plan should be applied to each individual topic for which progress is to be measured. Now, there are a number of ways to measure progress. And in my book, I describe a basic and a more refined method, which both use percentages to track progress. So as we can see in this example, which shows the basic method, it involves assigning a proportional percentage to each step. And in this example, the work consists of 4 steps. And therefore, each step has been assigned a percentage of 25%. So in other words, once 2 steps would have been completed correctly and in full, the progress would be 50%. Now, a more refined method involves distributing the percentages proportionally across the total number of steps and carefully considering things like impact, scope, duration of each step. So for instance, one step may require less time than another, or a later step may offer greater benefits than an earlier one. And based on these criteria, a more specific percentage can be assigned to each step. An example of this is shown in the refined method, which is displayed on this slide. Now, of course, both methods can be visualized using pie charts. And aside from pie charts, it's also possible to use spider charts to provide insight in the progress that is being made.
Thanks for describing that, Eric. It is really helpful to understand how to track maturity and momentum over the time during the implementation of the enterprise architecture. And that naturally brings us to one of the most practical parts of the implementation, which is the roadmap. From your perspective, how do EA roadmaps differ from traditional project or digital transformation roadmaps?
Excellent question. And I think that an EA roadmap differs from, like you said, a traditional project roadmap or digital transformation roadmap, mainly in scope, intent, and the type of guidance that it provides. So an enterprise architecture roadmap is concerned with how the entire organization's capabilities, processes, information, applications, technologies, everything, how it evolves over time. So it is structured around moving from a current state architecture to a target state architecture, showing the sequence of architectural changes needed to enable business strategy. Now, because of this, it typically spans multiple domains, multiple business units, and even multiple years, or it can span multiple years. And it focuses on architectural coherence, the dependencies, standards, and long-term capability building rather than on individual project initiatives. So a traditional roadmap is much narrower as it focuses on a single project or program, outlining the timelines, deliverables, phases, and the resource needs. Its purpose here is execution, showing what will be delivered and when. So it usually has a much shorter time horizon and is driven by delivery constraints rather than architectural considerations. So it doesn't attempt to describe enterprise-wide change, only the steps required for a particular body of work. And I think that a digital transformation roadmap sits somewhere between the two. So it is broader than a project roadmap because it addresses organizational transformation and it may include multiple initiatives, but it's still oriented around programs and outcomes, such as improving the customer experience, modernizing legacy systems, adopting cloud, but not around architectural structure. So it describes the major transformation themes, the initiatives, the investments, but it generally does not map them in detail to capabilities, to domains, or even transition states in the way that an EA roadmap does. So I think that in other words, digital transformation roadmaps describe the change the organization wants to accomplish, whereas EA roadmaps describe how the underlying architecture must evolve to support the change, and project roadmaps describe how individual pieces of work actually get delivered.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, for this practical distinction. And if I can recap that, we can say that enterprise architecture roadmap is like the bridge between the enterprise intent and the operational execution, showing why this initiative is being done and how it connects across several domains. And correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It's the larger overarching picture.
Awesome. And once those roadmaps are in motion, how do we keep track of what's working and what's not? In other words, what should a good architecture dashboard include and how and who is really for this dashboard?
First and foremost, dashboards are quite an excellent tool for displaying the overall progress of a particular topic. Especially, of course, at management level, dashboards are really in demand, and a good architecture dashboard should track the health, the progress, the alignment of an organization's architecture with its strategic objectives. So at its core, it measures how well the organization's business, data application, and technology layers are evolving toward the target state architecture. So it should include metrics such as the maturity level of the key capabilities, compliance with architectural standards, progress of major architectural initiatives, even risk exposure across systems and technologies. But it may also track resource allocation or cost efficiency and adoption of new technologies or modernization efforts. So essentially, the dashboards provide visibility into both current state of architecture and the roadmap towards the future state. Now, the audience for an architecture dashboard can span multiple levels of the organization. So enterprise architects and architecture teams use it to monitor their progress, to identify gaps, and to make informed decisions on priorities and trade-offs. And then there are CIOs and senior business leaders who rely on it to ensure that the investments and programs actually align with business strategy and, for example, governance standards. They benefit from understanding how architectural changes enable capabilities that support their objectives. And in some cases, portfolio managers or project managers use it to identify dependencies and risks across initiatives. So well-designed dashboards balance strategic insight with operational detail, giving each stakeholder the information relevant to their responsibilities. And this is important without overwhelming them with unnecessary data.
I think this is one of the most important benefits of the EA, which is having multiple viewpoints depending on the target audience. Now we have explored how to execute and control the enterprise architecture work in general. I would like to talk about how we can evolve this approach itself. As you mentioned before many times, the implementation wheel is not meant to be static. It's a model that grows with the practice. So let's look at how architects can tailor it, extend it, and even enhance the EA wheel with modern technologies like AI. One thing you emphasized a lot in our EA Explained series and in your book, Getting Started with Enterprise Architecture, is flexibility. If I can make it in one word, that no model should be applied blindly. So taking that into consideration, how can architects adapt or adjust the implementation wheel to better fit their organization needs?
The EA wheel approach is based on the TOGAF standard. So it offers a set of tailored artifacts that will allow the architecture practitioner to realize this foundational enterprise architecture. However, should an organization feel the need to, let's say, adjust the method by inserting or replacing the existing suggested artifacts with, let's say, a business capability map, and this is fully supported by the approach. So new or additional artifacts can be added, existing ones can be changed or even removed. And like you mentioned, flexibility, I like to call it tailorability, is actually key here. So each of these key focus areas of the implementation wheel, which are located in the outer ring of the approach, offers one or more actionable architectural artifacts that this practitioner has available. And this standardized set can be easily adjusted to fit an organization's needs.
So the message here is clear. Use the wheel as a guide, not as a rule book.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly that. What applies to the TOGAF standard or actually to any architecture framework applies to this implementation wheel approach as well. It's a starting point that you can tailor to fit your needs. What I think makes this approach especially easy to use and to implement is the number of steps has been reduced to the bare essentials. So, and even with these bare essentials come this suggested set of actions and artifacts that you can use, that you have at your disposal. But even if that doesn't entirely fit your organization or your need, you're still allowed to make these changes and tailor it specifically to your own organizational needs. And that makes it really powerful.
I would like to tackle now something that everyone is thinking about these days, which is AI. From your perspective, how do you think that the implementation wheel can be augmented with AI? to make it more dynamic, if we can say that? And how might that work in practice, if you can share with us some examples about that?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned this before as well, that the EA wheel approach is iterative in nature. And that means that all the stages and steps can be revisited as often as is necessary. And it also means that we can use AI to help us out. So we can use AI, for example, to import an image of a hand-drawn process and then have AI create the process map for us as this artifact that we use during the execution of the first stage. Or we can use AI to perform, let's say, capability assessments or to create architecture role descriptions based on our organizational strategy. It suggests areas of focus to improve our architecture maturity, to improve the maturity of our architecture capability. It can even scan strategically oriented documents to distill or extract basic or even core principles from them and translate them to usable requirements and even to standards or standard solution building blocks. And AI can be used to interpret existing strategic documentation, to support use case prioritization and create strategic artifacts and deliverables. These are just a few examples of the added value that AI can bring to the table in combination with the implementation wheel.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric, for sharing that. Looking ahead, do you have any plans to further develop or expand the implementation wheel approach in the future?
The idea behind the approach is to provide a way for organizations to begin working with architecture or have practitioners, allow practitioners their first experience with architecture. So it's really aimed at practitioners who are new or organizations who are new to working with architecture. So it acts as this stepping stone to architecture-oriented work. And the scope of the method or the approach has been deliberately delineated. And I really would like to maintain this because I feel that expanding the method would abandon the initial idea and might even diminish its effectiveness. One possibility, though, would be to supplement the techniques and the tools that are mentioned in the approach. So, for example, the EA wheel details the use of the CMMI framework for measuring architecture maturity. Perhaps I could look at adopting the method to be supplemented with other solutions or other frameworks. But my goal has always been to offer a method that can be applied instantly or immediately. And I think that making more options available would negate its immediate applicability. So the method is designed to be generic enough to be used in different scenarios with various contemporary techniques. And of course, AI is a term that we're all happy to use these days. And like I'm just showing you, the method can be easily combined with it. So AI focuses on automated execution, while the EA wheel offers an approach to steer it in the right direction. So in this way, multiple techniques or tools can complement each other. And I think that's one way, focusing on how the EA wheel approach can be used complemented with other tools or techniques. That's one way to further develop.
That's very interesting. And for those who want to dig deeper, where can people find more information, examples, or resources about the implementation wheel approach?
Well, of course, my website, eawheel.com, contains all the information about the approach, including detailed descriptions of how to use and apply the EA wheel in practice. And every aspect, stage, step, key focus area is detailed there. And interestingly enough, it's free for non-commercial use. So everyone can try to apply it in their daily practice.
Perfect. We will make sure to include all those links and references below in the video description. So to conclude that, Eric, the implementation wheel isn't just a method, it's a mindset that helps teams build architecture that will evolve, being alive, deeply connected with the organization, a business purpose. And by tailoring it or even extending it with AI tools like you discussed with some examples, it becomes a foundation for the next generation of enterprise architecture. Would you like to add something to that?
I think you made a wonderful point of referring to it as a next generation of enterprise architecture. I think it's a generation that should be focused on the ease of applying it, the ease of using it. We've had these decades of that were very theory intensive, theory heavy, if you will, which was good because it laid the groundwork for what we were supposed to think about when it comes to enterprise architecture. But now that we do have this knowledge, I think we should always try to look for ways to make it more approachable, make it more easy to apply in practice. So more and more organizations will actually start using enterprise architecture, because it can really help them, really support them to get them from this strategic planning that they have to a viable execution of it. And in order to be able to do that, we need something that is easy to use and not be seen as an obstacle. And I think if we are able to present enterprise architecture as something that is easy to use and easy to implement, it will allow organizations to look beyond this heap of theory that we're used to and actually start doing enterprise architecture in a practical and pragmatic way.
I can't agree more, Eric. From my perspective, simplicity is the new trend for the coming architects. And I believe that the implementation wheel is one of the most practical and pragmatic approaches and methods that architects can use to at least start the architecture practice within the organization context. Thank you for that. And that wraps up our part 2 of our discussion on the implementation wheel. We have seen how to move from planning to execution, how to measure what matters, and how to evolve the approach over time using the EA implementation wheel that Eric introduced in his book, Getting Started with Enterprise Architecture. Eric, thank you once again. This conversation really highlights what mature architecture looks like in action.
Yes. Thanks again for having me, Omar. It's been my pleasure and privilege to be able to explain also the second part of the implementation wheel, and helped, at least together with the first part, which we released recently, people have this complete idea or picture of what the implementation wheel could actually mean for them, bring to their tables.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks so much again, Eric, and see you in the next episode.